Hi, so in the previous lesson we created this fHit result called hit. So again we are doing that sweeping and then we are storing that result in this hit variable. And then afterwards, again I access that and store that information in this impact variable. So we did not actually do anything with this impact variable or with this hit information, in other words, in the previous video. And the main reason for that is that I have not really discussed FStrings and the log in more detail yet. So I'm going to do that in this lesson. Now there is a lot to types in Unreal Engine. You have the tchar, and they also have tarray and so forth. And I might have to redo this whole thing when Unreal Engine 5 comes out. So for right now, I just want to briefly introduce FString, because you might find that handy when you do logs right to the console if you do debugging, for example. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start off in the begin play here. So I'll define my custom FString. Okay, in this section I want to briefly explain this text macro. We've used it a couple of times before, so I'll link you to this documentation here. You can see it says, in general, you should be using the text macro when setting string literals. If you do not specify the text macro, your literal will be encoded using ANSI, which is highly limited in what characters it supports. ANSI literals being passed into FString need to undergo a conversion to tchar, so native Unicode encoding. And so it is more efficient to use that text macro. So again, when you do a string literal, go and pass that in the text macro. So now that I have that FString, I want to print that out to the console. So I'm just going to do a log temp again. This is what we'll be using for the most part. Again, you can declare custom categories, but for the most part you won't find that particularly useful. Especially as a beginner, this is what you'll use for the most part, alright? Okay, so because this is a string, I'm going to do yes for string, and I give it the handle of that string. Now an important thing here is you need to do the asterisk right before this. So similar to how you dereference something, okay, you use the asterisk and then the name. And we use that with strings. You don't have to do that with everything. So let's say you have an integer, which I'll show you a bit later here. You can just pass that in. But when it comes to strings, you need to have this dereferencing style here. So again, the asterisk followed by the handle, so the variable name. Alright. Now if you want to dig into why that is in more detail, you can press Alt Control and you can left click on that. Similar to how you can press Alt Control and left click on other things. Okay, such as begin play, for example. Or here, super, you can left click on the tick, for example. Stuff like that. So I'll press Alt Control and left click on that asterisk. And you can see this is not that many lines of code. We have some comments. It says get pointer to the string and return pointer to array of tchar if num, otherwise the empty string. So this looks really weird at first glance here, but you'll see it's simply the ternary operator, or also referred to as the conditional operator. You see we have the question mark and the colon and the three operands. So if this is true, so what is this data.num thing? It's going to return number of elements in array. You can go and look at the definition if you want, but basically if it doesn't return anything, then it's 0, then this will be false. Then it's simply going to return an empty string. Otherwise it's going to get the data. What does get data do? It is going to return a pointer to the first array entry. You know, you can go and revise the section on pointers and working with arrays, and maybe that'll clarify that for you in more detail. But we don't have to know like exactly what's going on behind the hood here. All we need to know really is that when we work with here with the FString and we want to print it out, so use it in the UE log here, then we need to use this dereferencing style, and that will then be the correct format for this string. So of course, if you don't need to output a variable, so as we are doing here with this name variable, then all you can do is you can put your text here as we've done before. So you just put hey in here or a name or something like that. But in most cases you'll have to pass in an integer, a string or something like that for that to actually be useful, right? You're going to access the name of an actor, for example, or the location or something like that, and you want to print that out for debugging purposes. And that's really what this section is all about. And so you can see, similar to the printf function in the C language, this also has this a list of arguments. Control Shift Spacebar, and you can see we have the arguments. You have the category name, verbosity, the format, and then you have the arguments, right? Again, I'm ending that off with the semicolon. So that's the referencing thing, okay, with the asterisks when it comes to using f-strings. So again, don't worry too much about how it works under the hood. That's kind of the whole point of abstraction, is to allow us to use stuff without worrying too much about how it works under the hood, okay? Okay, so I'm going to Control F5 to build and run this so that we can see what this prints out. I have this f-string name and I have this Bob, and I'm simply printing that. So I have these UE logs, so I want to print to the log, and you can see I have warning, log, error, and display. So I just want to demonstrate what those will look like when we actually see those pop up in the editor. And I also want to show you a few more things in the output log. I'll close mine off and you can get that again in Window, Developer Tools, and Output Log. So a few things that I have not mentioned previously is you can click this drop down here and clear on Plane Editor. So this will clear it when you click a Plane Editor. Okay, I'll go and play here. In this case, I'll simulate. I'll scroll down and you can see a log temp, warning, hey Bob. This one here is a bit different. It doesn't show a warning or an error or something like that. It just shows a log temp, which is the category, hey Bob. Then we have an error, hey Bob as well. And this is display, hey Bob. So display and log is very similar. So for the most part, I'll simply use log or warning or error. Okay, now what we can do is we can click on filters, categories. We can turn off show all. And then you can search for log temp, which is right here. I would like to note, whilst you are in this menu, you can start typing. And now you can see it shows searching. So you have a log and then you have a log temp. So with that enabled, you can now see what that prints out. So I'm going to turn off, clear, and then I'm just going to click play again. Okay, it says repeating last play command, simulate, and then it's going to show me all of my log outputs. All of these print hey Bob, but in a different way. And now you can go and turn off, let's say, errors. And now we only see the warnings and the messages. Turn off messages, now we only see warnings. So I showed you this briefly previously, right? But now you can really see how useful this is. And this is the categories. There's a huge amount of those categories. Okay, let's say we want to create an f-string from multiple elements and then go and put that in a log to output. So I'll go and delete this first. And before I actually do that, I'll show you how we can pass an integer, for example, into here as well alongside of this string. So I'll go and create an integer. So we have that level now, and I'll just change this around. And here you can do d or I for integers. Again, it also uses the percentage, but we're not doing a string in this case, we're doing an integer. So you can do %d or %i. So I have to pass that argument now actually right at the end. So I'm just passing that handle in here, and that should work fine now. Control B to build that. Okay, I'll click play again. And now you can see warning, name is Bob, and then level is 9000. So this here is our string. Let's say we want to save all of this information into a string. So we want to build a string right before we pass that into the output log. So instead of passing all of this stuff here, we want to create a separate string with all of this, and then we can just pass that string into here. Okay, let's see how we can do that. So we have this printf. You can see if I hover over this, it says constructs FString object similar to how classic printf works. So the printf function, you can see, might be a good reference here. So basically I'm just going to take all of this stuff and I'm going to paste it in here. And then I'm going to remove this. I'll just change the handle, make sure I have that asterisk again, that a star for the dereferencing basically. And I'll actually just go and do $s here to print that out. And that is pretty much it. Again, we want to go and construct this string. So printf is not for print. In this case, it's going to actually format. So it's a formatting function. It's going to combine, all of these elements that we want into one string. Control B to build that and go back to the editor. So that is now complete. I'll actually clear the log in this case and click play. And you can see this works fine. This is our string. Okay, we had this previously as well. Okay, at this point you might be asking, like, where did I get those specifiers from? Depending on if it's a string or an integer, for example. And you remember, if you hover over I'll just go back. If you go and hover over this printf, you can see it says refer to standard printf format. Constructs FString object similar to how classic printf works. I'll just bring this back. So I'll link you to this documentation, CPP reference, and you can see it explains a bunch of stuff here. Scroll down and you can see S for character string, and you have D and I here for integer. Okay, and you have a few other things. Of course, it might also be a good idea to go and search for other examples, maybe in the Unreal Engine documentation or something like that. But this is a good place to start. And if you scroll down, you have a bunch of examples. So I hope this section was useful to you. I'll go and delete that now. And then I'll go back here. So where we have this effector impact, we have this hit information that we are accessing the location from. And we again are storing that into this impact vector, which is an F vector. Okay, so that's cool and everything, but what can we now do with this? Let's say we want to print that out to the console and use that for debugging. How can we do that? Okay, before moving on, as an exercise, I'd like you to try and print out the X, Y, and Z components of this impact vector. Okay, so try and print that out to the console. And so what we'll be using as a hint here is the %f escape sequence for floats. Also check out the F vector member functions, and maybe it has a useful function in there that you can use to make this process even faster. When we come back, I'll show you how I do this. So I'll do it right here in the tick function. So this is not a string, so we do not need to use the asterisk. Okay, we can just do. And if we do the dot operator, remember this is not a pointer, it's just a regular variable. And you can search through these if you want. If I click this here, I can see the variables, or in other words, I can filter this to only see the variables and the constants. Then you can see we have things like X, Y, and Z. Okay. This should work fine. We have, and again I use this percentage sign and F for float. And so we have X right there. That will get replaced by whatever this is. It will be initialized to 0 at first, so we'll get 0 at first. And then when it actually has information, then it will replace this here with that information. Similar thing for Y and also for Z. And that should work fine, so I'll Control F5 to build and run this. This will open up Unreal Engine in just a second here. Remember that f vector is a struct and it has those members. So all we are doing here is we are accessing those members. Okay, I'll click play to simulate, and at first you'll see we have zeros as I mentioned, and then we get that warning, so log temp. Again, I still have those filters on, right? I still have this filter right here for the category, and I'm just displaying everything here. And you can see every frame now we will get this printed out, so where that impact is happening. We have X, Y, and Z, just like I logged it out. I'll just stop that. Back in Visual Studio, what you can also do is, I'll go and remove those, and then I'll do impact dot. With many classes and such, you have this toString. So what I'll do is I'll select that. That is a function, so just make sure to get these parentheses correct right at the end. And what is that going to return? Well, you can see that is an FString right in the IntelliSense right here. So what does this mean? Well, this means we need to use this dereferencing style basically. So whatever this returns, this is going to return an FString. So we need again to use that dereferencing style. And right in here, I'll do %s again. Okay, so that should work fine now. Control B to build that, and we'll see what happens in Unreal Engine. Okay, hot reload complete, so I'll build this, and similar thing happens. We get impact, colon, and then you'll see these numbers get printed out. Again, at first it will start at 0 because it will initialize to 0, and then eventually once we have that hit, that impact, then that will change and update. Alright, so that is another way. So with classes and such, remember that you typically have some sort of toString member function that makes it useful and fast to go and print stuff out for debugging purposes should we need to do that. Alright, so I hope this section was useful to you. Okay, in this section I want to introduce you to the debug message. The on-screen debug message, as you can see here, is very handy. It will display basically in the viewport some debug message. So we've already talked about the UE log, but this is also very useful, like when you want to see on-screen messages as opposed to having to dig around in the output log. Okay, I want to discuss some of the parameters before we actually take a look at this in Visual Studio. So the first parameter is the key parameter, which is a unique key to prevent the same message from being added multiple times. Again, I'll link you to this, to the documentation. Now what you can do is you can also use -1. So when you use that, then it will go and add a new message each time instead of overriding or basically replacing the previous one. There's another one that we'll look at in the example as well. Then you have this time to display, how to display the message in seconds. So you can set that to 2, for example. Then you can also do the color, so the F color. We'll look at how to set the color for this, and then also the message, of course, that you want to display. So basically, if you don't want the screen to be flooded with messages, right, then you can change that key parameter to a positive number and give each log basically a unique key, right? And then each message that will print with that key will basically remove or replace the prior messages with that same key. And this is useful again if you're going to log the same thing out quite often. Maybe not in something like the tick function, that might not be very useful. That might be a bit extreme, but that is an example. Another example might be, let's say you have output. So when you press keys, so left, right, up and down, for example, you have some debugging going on the screen. And as you move around, you might press those keys often, right? So instead of having the screen flood with messages, it's just going to replace the same message with the updated one that again has the same key. As I mentioned, you can also do -1, and that will not replace your previous messages. That might be useful if you want to compare previous results or messages to the current one, for example. Or you can use -1 if it's just a quick message that you want to display and you don't care like if they stack for a bit. Okay, I'll go to the documentation, add on-screen debug message, and you can see I actually have a few other parameters as well, newer on top, for example, and so on. So we We'll look at that again in Visual Studio. You can see right here, be new on top only works with key index underscore none. So here is the include, pound include engine / engine.h. And again, you'll see that I don't actually include that. Okay, in just a second here when we open Visual Studio. And the main reason is that it works, it's global. So unless I get errors and things, or unless I know that, I have to include something, then I typically don't include it. Because what you end up doing is you include a lot of stuff, a lot of unnecessary stuff. And I try and avoid that again by not including things unless I really have to. So if it works without that include, then, that's fine. But otherwise, or if you are concerned, just include that header as well when you want to use that add-on screen debug message. So you can actually get a lot of this information from the parameters and actually reading, that information that pops up in the IntelliSense. But I'm just highlighting this information for you right here. So as a quick example, I am in the begin play function, and you can see I have this FString that I called screen msg for message. So I just print out hello world basically. You can see I have that here. I'm checking here for the game engine, so whether that's null or not, and just to make sure. So I have G engine, and this is global. All right, so you can go and include the header, but I actually did not have the header included here. It works without that, but if it does not work for you, then go and include that header. And here you can see add on-screen debug message. I'm setting it to index none in this case. 5 seconds. I have the color set to blue. Okay, so how do you know what colors are available to you here? Well, you can basically go through this menu. You can see blue, cyan, black, red, and so forth. I'll actually just change that here to red. And I'll open up the editor here. Okay, so that is finished, and if I click play, that should show up in my viewport. You can see I don't have that bold lighting information warning. You can just click bold or go and bold lighting only if you want to do that. Okay, just click that and you'll see it'll bold the lighting. Just to get that error kind of out of the way, click play and you can see that shows up, hello human. Another thing you can do is you can click on play and then new editor window. That'll open up this new window, of course, and then you can see your message a bit more clearly without anything else like popping up in your way. So that is a quick demonstration on that, the add on-screen debug message. So we'd like to note that you can of course go and declare a variable, so for your color outside, and just pass that in right here, just like I've done here with the FString. If you left click in here, Control Shift and spacebar, and you can see the overload. You can see we have the key, the time to display, which is a float, the display color, and then also what debug message we want to display. And it's set to newer on top by default. So go and play around with that. That might be useful to you, so I thought I'd add it in here.